Okay, now that you've got an idea of the different appellations, I know already it's not very simple to get your head around, but repetition, again, looking at the map and the different appellation zones will really very much help. Now we're going to go into something that's a bit more complicated and many people can't get their head around. It's the different classifications of Bordeaux, the different classification systems, the different classifications that this region has had. We're going to start with the most important, 1855, the 1855 classification. Now, 1855 classification, I told you a bit about this earlier on. The idea was to classify by quality the different wines of Bordeaux. This was done under Napoleon III, so it's a long time ago, and it was done for the Exposition Universelle, the Universal Exposition of Paris in 1855. So the idea was to classify these wines in order of quality. Top being premier Grand Cru classé, then we would have second Grand Cru classé, troisième Grand Cru classé, quatrième Grand Cru classé, cinquième Grand Cru classé. These, it was different to put them in quality. So the easy way to do it was to classify them by price. So the most expensive wines were premier Grand Cru classé, etc. Not 100% exact, but that is very much close to the truth of how it really happened. So 1855, some chateaux were awarded the classification of Premier Grand Cru classé, then Deuxième Grand Cru classé. It is a system, it is a classification that is still today the classification of Bordeaux wines, of top Bordeaux wines. So it's a long time ago. If you were classified Premier Grand Cru classé back in the days, there's pretty much nothing you could do to lose it. So 1855, as I said, you could have done pretty much anything, made some terrible wines. I'm not saying by any stretch of imagination that this is what is happening at all. But you could be making terrible wines and you would still have that status of a premier, deuxième, troisième Grand Cru classé, first, second, third growth, which is it's not what's really happening, but it's one of those scary thoughts. Some of the estates, the chateaux that were awarded Cru classé status in 1855 went on to be divided during family breakups, acquisitions. They were broken down, and both the estates that were for example, that estate was broken up into two separate chateaux. Both those chateaux would inherit the status of Grand Cru classé. Sadly, it's a bit difficult. If your chateau didn't exist back in the days, you will never be a Grand Cru classé. You will never be in that classification, that all-important 1855 classification. And as a result, that's going to have a big impact on the success that you can enjoy as a Bordeaux chateau. And it's going to have a big impact on the financial returns that you're going to have as well, because those wines aren't really traded if you're not in the Premier Grand Cru classé. There are a couple of exceptions. We're going to talk about that more in depth when we talk about the Bordeaux wine market, but pretty much that's the state of play. Now, the 1855 classification was done for the wines of the Médoc, and they've added in one Grave wine, which is Aubryon, the single non-Médoc wine to get classified in that 1855 classification. You've got the full classification that's in the attachment there. You're going to see that some estates existed in 1855. They've either changed names, but they've remained with that status of Grand Cru Classé. So Grand Cru Classé, Médoc, and 1 Grave wine. Funnily enough, all the Saint-Emilion wines were left out. So that's why later in the 1950s, Saint-Emilion had its own classification. Now, let's look at the classification of Saint-Emilion wines. Saint-Emilion decided that it too had to classify wines according to quality, to try and understand which wines are the best. And the Saint-Emilion classification was done in the 1950s, and there are different levels. We have the Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé A, which are the top. We have then the Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé B, which are the second tier of best wines. Then below that we have the Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé. And below that, to make things simple, we have the Saint-Emilion Grand Cru. Okay? And below that, we've got the appellation of Saint-Emilion. So if we look at bottom in terms of quality from less good to top to best, we have Saint-Emilion, then we have Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé upper level, we go upper level Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé B, and the very top of the pyramid in terms of quality, Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé A. Now you remember I told you that that it was only Médoc that had, bar one wine, it was only Médoc that had the classification. The Grave region didn't have its classification. So the Grave region decided to do its own classification of wines in terms of quality once again. And that was done in the early 1950s, 1953, I believe, when there were 16 wines that were given the Cru status in that classification. Finally, we have another group of classifications, which is the Cru Bourgeois. Now that was done again for the Médoc region, as you can see, and it was done by Bordeaux wine merchants under the governance of the Bordeaux Chamber of Commerce and the Chamber of Agriculture. And the idea was to give a classifications to wines which didn't get the classification back in 1855, to have a classification system for those wines, and to have a possibility for new chateaus coming up to be able to get a classification. And this classification, though, the Cru Bourgeois classification, you can go up or down in terms of status of that classification. There is an actual review system. So the Cru Bourgeois appellation applies to Médoc, to the Médoc region. So to the appellations of Médoc and Haut-Médoc, firstly, the bigger regions, the bigger appellations, and then the appellations of Listrac, Moulis, and then, of course, Margaux, Saint-Julien, Pauillac, and Saint-Estèphe. Okay, so in terms of Cru Bourgeois, we have different levels. Starting off from the bottom, we have Cru Bourgeois. Going up one level, we have the Cru Bourgeois Supérieur, and then we've got Cru Bourgeois Exceptionnel, which is the top of Cru Bourgeois. There's also been in 2000 and in the late 2000s new classifications, which is the Cru Artisan. Okay, now I hope this all makes sense in your head. It's not an easy one to get your head round, but I definitely recommend that you do come back to this video so that you clearly understand the appellation system and then the classification system, which are two things that are separate. We first of all have an appellation system, and then we have a classification system that where the idea was to classify wines in order of quality. And that is basically it for module 2. In our next module, we're going to be looking at the different zones, the different sub-regions of this Bordeaux production area of the Bordeaux wine region.